Welcome to a small session on ITIL Fundamentals. We are going to cover the following topics. We are going to see what ITIL is, a brief history of ITIL and the adoption of ITIL in the market space. How does ITIL define what a service is? And we will look into the service life cycle phases. We will look into some of the factors that have contributed to making ITIL successful. We would see the three different types of services. We would briefly look into two success stories of organizations that have adopted ITIL best practice, and at last we will look into the certification model of ITIL. Okay, this is a little about myself. My name is Anish Mathai. I am an ITIL expert. I've done some certifications on Agile and cloud as well. I have over 2 decades of experience in solutioning enterprise solutions, focusing especially on web technologies. But nowadays I focus more on best practices, assessing the maturity of a best practice, and making recommendations for improvement. My focus area is on ITIL, Agile, and DevOps. You have my contact number below. You can contact me. Okay, let's get going. Now, what is ITIL? ITIL is basically a set of practices for managing IT services. Now, why would IT services need to be managed? IT services need to be managed because we want to ensure that these IT services are aligned to business needs. As you see in the slide, ITIL is not a standard. It is a framework or a guidance to be adopted into any specific environment. And then the last point is about the ISO 20000, which is basically a standard that organizations adhere to get their ITSM practices audited, certified. Okay, now that we have seen that, let's briefly look into the history of ITIL. It all began somewhere in the 1980s when the UK government wanted to find how to make IT services more efficient. So they set about evaluating and studying the best and the most successful organizations who were already doing it. And then they collected all their data and practices, and they had around 40 books, and that is what they call as ITIL books. Subsequently, it has gone through a couple of editions, and the books have narrowed down from 40 books to 9 books in 2004 when the V2 version came out, and then subsequently when the V3 version came out in 2007. Now we have 5 life cycle phases with 5 books. There has been an update in the year 2011, which has to do with more with extensive interface with customers. We won't touch upon that this today, but in subsequent videos we'll talk about what's the difference between V3 and 2011. Okay, now looking into the adoption of ITIL, here in this following screen you see a wide spectrum of domains that have adopted ITIL best practice. Typically you have around 3 million certified ITIL professionals. That is just an evidence of the huge adoption of ITIL best practices across the industry. Okay, now we'll look into what a service is, and before we focus on IT service, we will look into service in general, and then we will go work our way towards knowing what an IT service is. So in this picture you see different kinds of services that generally we are all exposed to in our daily lives. Now in all these cases there is a customer and there is a service provider or a service provider agent who acts on behalf of a service provider organization. Something interesting to note is unlike the two pictures at the bottom of the screen, the pictures on top do not necessarily need the service provider and the customer being together in one location. For example, my postman can still deliver my mail although I am away at work. But that may not always be possible when you have to go and meet a physician. So you may need you may need to be with a service provider in which case in this case is a physician, um, so that you can really consume the service that he or she has to offer you. Okay, now that we have seen in general what a service is and the fact that there's a service provider, there's a customer, the customer wants some value out of this particular handshake, let's see how ITL defines the word service. So if you read the slide, it says services are a means of delivering value to customers by facilitating the outcomes customers want to achieve without the ownership of specific cost and risk. Now, if you go back to the earlier slide, um, if you just take the example of a medical practitioner, you know, we may go and meet a physician because we have some complaints and we want the physician to sort of guide us and help us identify the problem or give us some medication wherein our pain or whatever will be addressed. So that is a intended outcome that you as a customer would want before you walk into a physician's office. So that sort of covered the fact that the top portion of this particular statement which says that it's a means of delivering value. Now if the physician is able to give me the right medication and put me back into good health, it means that he has facilitated the intended outcome that I wanted from having consumed a service. Okay, now let's focus on the second part of the statement. It says without the ownership of specific cost and specific risk. Now what it really means is that if I paraphrase it, it would mean without the customer owning specific risk and specific cost. So if we just go back to the slide and look into the me meeting a physician, there are always some risk. Maybe there are new medication or new tools in the market which the physician may not be aware of, in which case the hospital, who is a service provider, would ensure that the physicians are trained on the latest medications, they have access to white papers, they may call in specialists to the hospital and talk to the doctors and the physicians to ensure that they're all aware of the latest tools and medication available in the market. Now, this hospital in doing so has reduced the risk wherein I as a patient would not have the right advice in the light of new medications. Okay, now all these so that's how the hospital would mitigate the risk. But whenever you try to mitigate this risk, you all the countermeasures that we employ would mean cost. So a hospital would be aware of the fact that when they have a clinic open or when they have physicians interacting with patients, these are some of these costs that they need to absorb so that they keep their physicians up to date and they can provide a good service to me as a patient. So that's what I was just reiterating on the second part. Every service is valuable only if it delivers value in the form of facilitating business outcomes. But of course, as a service provider, you need to have thought of the risk. You need to think about the countermeasures that you need to put in place so that the risk can be either negated or it can be lessened. Okay, I want to focus a little on the word outcome. So I'll talk about outcome, which is at the bottom, and then we'll talk about output. So outcome is what really business requires. For example, business may require to make the right decisions, and for those decisions, they would need some sort of a trending graph from IT, or they may need a report from IT. Okay, so the report itself is an output that IT would deliver to business. So the report itself is an output. But when would that output meet the outcome of business? Only if the report is accurate, it is right, it has done the right, it has taken the right sample of data, and when it enables business to meet their need of making decisions, then they have met the outcome. Okay, so now how do we meet those outcomes? It could be as a result of carrying out n number of activities, following through on a process, or just consuming a service. So I'll just use an example there. Let's say a server went down, okay, and the service desk would open a incident. An incident, as you know, is a process. It has a lot of activities within an incident. For example, you may want to you log your incident, you categorize your incident, you prioritize your incident, you do investigation, diagnosis. You may want to escalate the incident if need be to an SME team. But at the end of the day, you have resolved the incident wherein you have restored the service back. You have brought the service back as operational. And so that is the intended outcome. So every service has to deliver an outcome. Okay. In doing so, we meet business needs. IT cannot be, I let me just draw a picture. If I draw this IT would give out an output, sorry, in the form of a report. Let's say a report. Okay, forgive my handwriting. But this report, when it goes to business, if he can make decisions, then it is valuable in the eyes of business or the customer. Okay, let me just clear the screen and let me just move on to the next slide. Okay, now here we are going to look into what ITIL defines as service lifecycle phases. This was brought about by the V3 update in 2000, V3 version in 2007, where ITIL has defined 5 lifecycle phases, namely service strategy, then service design, service transition, then service operations, and the last one is what we call as CSI, or continual service improvement. So in the next slide, we will look into each one of those phases. Okay, so let's just begin with this identifying what this diagram is trying to convey to us. So business or customers would come with requirements, and someone has to strategize in terms of deciding either to meet those requirements or deciding, well, we do not want to address those requirements. So a strategy team is one who decides what to do and what not to do. Okay, so the primary question that is being addressed by strategy is why. So we want to see, why are we doing these things, or why are we not doing these things? So they go about reviewing their own policies. They know what are the resources that they have in hand, what are their constraints, and then they come with what we call as service charter. A service charter is it's a document that basically lists down what services the service strategy team would like to be delivered to our customers, to what type of customers, what are the different offerings of a service, under what conditions you provide these services would all be part of your service charter. The service charter is then put into what we call as SKMS, from wherein n number of other stakeholders have view into that particular service charter. So once the strategy part is done, where we address the question why, we come to the design phase where the primary question that they address is not why but how. How are we going to deliver this service to our customers? What would it take for us to design it? What architecture we need to adhere to? What standards we need to comply with? And then they come with what they call as a service design package, which is basically a collection of design artifacts which primarily addresses how we can deliver value to our customers. And then the SDP goes back to your service transition team, where primarily they transition. Transition begins with um, adding new features or changing existing features, or you may retire certain features. But basically, you do development, you do QA activities, you move it to a staging area, and you may have n number of staging, n number of filters, and ultimately, if it's all good, we go and deploy it into uh, our production server, and the service is now in operations. So what happens in operations? In operations, typically, the service is now running. It has to run in an agreed level so as to meet business expectation, and any deviations from that level is always brought to the attention of the SMEs or the service desk folks, and they bring it back into that particular bandwidth. CSI is all about making continual service improvement. As they say, any service that is standstill is always declining because business is moving ahead. And so IT has to align with the business changes and ensure that we are on top of what we deliver, ensure that we deliver value, ensure that the cost it would take for us to deliver a service would be minimum. The cost it would take for a service, for a customer to consume a service, also be minimum or reduced. So we just looked into what ITIL is. We looked into the service lifecycle phases. We also looked into the 5 phases and what each phase would do. And now we will look into what has made ITIL so successful. Okay, let me just clear the screen before that. Okay. Uh, as you see in the screen, there are the factors are listed below. ITIL is successful because it is vendor neutral or tool agnostic. It does not mandate that you should use a specific BMC tool or an HP tool or an IBM tool. It is non-prescriptive in the sense that it does not mandate a particular way of doing it. It gives you the freedom to adapt as per your context. So in a sense, it is non-prescriptive. It is non-proprietary, which means that it is public knowledge, and it is a collection of best practices which has got contribution from the academic world, from industry. And so these are the four reasons why ITL has been so successful. Okay, now that we have seen um, what makes ITL successful, let's dwell into what are the different types of services. We talked about what are services, but can we categorize services into different buckets or different categories? So here we have a dining service. So typically in a dining service, what would a customer want? The customer would want a good dining experience, a good noise-free ambience where food is presented in a timely manner. So that is a core service that any dining service provider would provide. And you as a customer would go to a dining area because they give you this particular core service of good food, good ambience at the right rate for you. But now, are there people who work behind the scenes so that you as a customer would be provided with a service? Yes. And that's what we call as enabling service. So as you see in the picture, there's an army of chefs and technicians to manage all the equipment and managers so that you can deliver your service to your customers. And that's what we call as enabling service. There's also another category of service which we call as enhancing service. Now, this is like the royalty cards, bonus points that you could accumulate when you visit a particular dining space. It enables a customer to come back. You're trying to build loyalty among your customers. Okay. So now that we just saw it in this particular context, we'll just go a bit more deeper into what are these types. Now, the core service is the basic outcome that any customer wants. If you deliver the core service, then you have delivered value. And that's why he comes to you and he pays you for the service, because you have delivered that particular core service. But if you take the enabling service, it is not a service that it may not be visible to a customer. So a customer may not look upon the fact that you manage your dining equipments or your ovens or your cookery items and all those things. For them, they really do not care. Um, but then, if there is an issue with the enabling service, it is going to impact your core service. So, in that sense, it is as equal in importance as your core service. The enhancing service is basically those non-essentials, but they are like the buy one get one free, the frills and the bows, if you may. They entice the customer. They entice him to come back to you, and especially you face competition by other service providers. Then you use these enticing ways and offer them better services. If you think about the Ola cab service, if you use so much after so much trips, then you may get a one trip free or whatever it is. They all entice you to come back to you. Okay, now we just want to move from a dining experience to a typical IT scenario. So here what I've listed is I've used a metaphor of a payroll service. The core service that they deliver is they ensure that salaries are credited to bank accounts of the employees. But for them to do so, there can be n number of enabling services. I've just listed one of it. They need to ensure that the tax is always calculated. So there's another application or another team that calculates tax based on the different salary bands that the employees have. And if that does not work, then you cannot really deliver your core service of coming up with the right amount to be delivered to your customer's bank account. But you may also think of providing enhancing service, wherein on the pay stub you may provide some recommendations for your employees, saying that, well, you fall into this bracket, but there are different ways so that you can save on your taxable income and all those things. So typically, you as an IT person would have to first of all understand what is your core service, why do customers come to you, what is tangible in terms of value, what is willing to pay you for. But then you should also be aware of the enabling service, and there could be n number of enabling services for one core service. And then you need to know, are we giving away any enhancing services? And sometimes many of these enhancing services may tomorrow become a core service. So you need to watch out for those things as well. Okay. Now we look into a couple of success stories. And I just want you to read these. There are 2 slides. I just want you to read it, and then I'll just talk about it. Okay. So here, as part of adopting ITIL best practices in and in particularly the incident management process. Visa was able to reduce incidents. um, they were able to, the reduction in time to resolve incidents was as many as 25%. That is huge saving for an organization like Visa or any other organizations. But if you look at JP Morgan Chase, I like the last point that they make here. They could eliminate 500,000 service desk calls. You know, this is for a particular year. So huge amount of savings. And then you got a 75% first call resolution rate, which means that 7.5 times out of 10 calls is all resolved at the L1 level, at the very first level, rather than being escalated to the senior teams or to the SMEs. Okay, briefly, we just want to touch on the benefits of ITIL. You will, because your services improve, naturally the outages reduce, and so your cost will always reduce. ITL does push for knowing not just the here and now, but also knowing the year after, in the sense that you have processes like business relationship management where they interact with the customers, get to know the roadmap of the customer so that you can sort of almost foresee what the customer wants in future, and you can build it in your services even today to a certain extent, so that tomorrow on demand you can provide it with as minimum tweak or as less time as possible. And that sort of touches even on the last point, your ability to deliver services, although business has been changing at a fast rate. So how agile, so in a way you're referring to what, whether your services are agile. Okay, we just want to briefly touch on the publications of ITIL. There are two publications, what we refer to it as core publications and complementary publications. In core publications, they provide generic best practices for each of those 5 life cycle phases independent of the domain. There are good practices that can be applied anywhere. But if you refer to the complementary publications, they refer to publications that are specific to certain domains, certain industries, specific to certain technologies, or even specific to certain operating models, cloud being one of them. Okay, so we come to the last slide, and here we want to touch upon the certification scheme that Axelos has defined in the space of ITIL. You start with foundation, which gives you 2 credits, and then you have many offerings that you can choose from. You can either go by the intermediate life cycle modules, or you can go by the cabling modules. Um, these cabling modules are 4 of them. Each one of them give you 4 credits. These are 5 life cycle modules, and they carry 3 credits each. ITL practitioner was something that was introduced somewhere early this year, and this also carries 3 credits. So once you get 15 credits from your intermediate modules, then you write your what we call as the managing across the service life cycle exam, and then you get your masters. You need to get 22 credits for you to become an ITL expert. Okay, so did I use the word master? Sorry, to be an ITL expert. Master is a different ball game. You need to go through some sort of mentoring with a mentor from Axelos. You need to contribute towards their core books, have implemented ITL projects, but we're not going to talk about that now. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the session. We just briefly looked into what ITL is. We looked into the history of ITL, the wide adoption of ITL across industry. We looked into what service is a means of delivering value by facilitating business outcomes without the ownership of specific risk and specific cost. We talked about the 5 life cycle phases. You have service strategy, wherein you ask the question why, you come with the strategy to meet business requirements. Then you think about, then you consider service design, wherein you basically address the question how. You need to think about availability, capacity, and security, and all those things. And then you come with a service design package, which you pass on to your transition manager, where they develop, they code, they test, they go through staging areas, and ultimately they put into a production server, and now your service is in operations. In operations, you want to ensure that your service deliver value, and so you're always monitoring your services. CSI is about making continual service improvement. You can improve pretty much anything and everything, so you always are on a treadmill running towards making improvements, lowering your cost, making it cheaper for the customer to consume your service. And then we saw there were four factors why ITL has been successful. We want to remember that ITL is non-proprietary, vendor neutral, best practice, um, and tool agnostic. We saw there were three types of services. You have core service, enabling service, enhancing services. And then we saw a couple of success stories as in Visa or JP Morgan Chase, but you can look it out, ANZ Bank, Barclays, huge success stories from adopting ITIL. And last, we touched upon the certification model of ITIL Foundation. Gives you 2 credits, intermediate modules, and then you get 17 credits both from foundation and intermediate, and then you write your MALC, and that gives you an ITIL expert certificate. Okay, here you have my contact details. You can call me at any time or email me, and then I'll be able to address some of your queries. Thanks a lot. Bye.